And IU. And looking forward to a great conversation. Tom Vance again from Kansas State University.
Thank you. Good afternoon, judges. We are Unit 3 representing Team Indiana. We are 4 seniors hailing from Hamilton Southeastern High School in Fishers, Indiana. My name is Muntu Munaf. I'm the unit captain, and I plan on attending Indiana University next year to study physics.
Hi, my name is Brianna Wright, and next fall I plan on attending Indiana University to study public administration and affairs.
Hi, my name is Savannah Sheely, and next fall I plan on attending Purdue University to study supply chain information and analytics.
Good morning, my name is Joshua Manisowski, and next fall I will be attending Butler University to study arts administration with a focus in theater.
And our coach is Ms. Chandler, and our unit mentor, Ms. Kane.
Great, thank you. So I will read the question for you. Our question today is question 1. I do not think the United States would come to an end if we lost our power to declare an act of Congress void. I do think the Union would be imperiled if we could not make that declaration as to the laws of several states, said Oliver Wendell Holmes. What impact has judicial review had on federalism? Is judicial review a counter-majoritarian practice? Please support your position. What limits, if any, would you place on the practice of judicial review? You may begin.
Chief Circuit Judge Diane Sykes said,
The court's legitimacy arises from the source of its authority, which is, of course, the Constitution, and is best preserved by adhering to decision methods that neither expand nor contract, but legitimize the power of judicial review.
Judicial review allows appellate courts to determine a national or state legislative or executive act in violation of the Constitution. Article 6 of the Constitution states the Constitution is the supreme law of the land, and in combination with the 14th Amendment's incorporation doctrine, appellate courts could invalidate state laws.
Federalism exists when the power is shared between local, state, and national government, with enumerated rights outlined in Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. Judicial review has a significant impact on federalism as it allows the Supreme Court to declare state laws unconstitutional and enact new federal policies through a simple majority vote. In Obergefell v. Hodges in 2015, the court used reasonable judgment to impose fundamental rights.
judicial review was first applied in the United States in 1796, which addressed a direct tax. In 1803, the courts established the review power in Marbury v. Madison. Court members policed congressional power by invalidating the Missouri Compromise and Dred Scott v. Sanford in 1857.
More recently, the Supreme Court has taken a more centralized approach to decisions by enforcing a variety of individual rights against local and state governments in Roe v. Wade in 1973 and Lawrence v. Texas in 2003, in which the court struck down state laws. These decisions respectively legalize abortion and sodomy.
Our entire unit believes judicial review is a counter-majoritarian practice. By overturning laws created by elected officials whose purpose is to reflect the will of the people, judicial review prefers the ideals of the Constitution over the majority will. My colleague Joshua and I believe judicial review is an essential component of the democratic process, as it is the judiciary's purpose to ensure laws passed by Congress adhere to the Constitution regardless of the majority will.
Muntu and I disagree with our colleagues. As attorney Alexander Bickel noted in 1962,
when the Supreme Court declares unconstitutional a legislative act, it thwarts the will of representatives of the actual people of the here and now, not on behalf of the prevailing majority, but against it.
This practice undercuts the democratic nature of our government by neglecting the will of the people in favor of unelected justices.
However, according to Bruce Ackerman, a Yale law professor, judicial review may also be majoritarian. Sometimes elected officials pass laws that fail to reflect the will of the people. Brown v. Board of Education in 1954 decided racial segregation in public schools is unconstitutional, which opposed the separate but equal doctrine and Jim Crow laws. 2 months after the 1954 decision, Harvard Law School professor Arthur E. Sutherland argued public opinion in favor of racial equality had been gradually increasing. Because of judicial review, the courts undermined laws passed by elected legislators. Thus, it can be argued they promoted the will of the people.
Since judicial review holds enormous power, debate exists on whether or not limits should occur. As of now, the only way a Supreme Court decision can be reversed is by the court reversing itself or the addition of an amendment to the Constitution.
Brianna and I believe there should be no limits set on judicial review, as the courts should act as sole interpreters of the Constitution and serve as a check on the other branches.
Savannah and I believe that current limits on federal court power to review legislation should be exercised. The exceptions clause of Article 3 allows Congress to limit appellate jurisdiction by judicial stripping. This curbs judicial activism and legitimizes review.
Former Justice Robert Jackson noted,
"We are not final because we are infallible, but we are infallible only because we are final." This is the conclusion of our prepared testimony, and we are now ready for your questions.
Thank you. You raised some interesting point. You said at one point that the Supreme Court enacts new federal policy. You talked about it promoting the will of the people. What exactly is the role of the court? Is it to support or promote the will of the people? Is it supposed to enact federal policy, or is it supposed to uphold the rule of law? And what's the balance between those?
one of the main problems that the court has to tackle is interpreting the Constitution in a way that interpreting the Constitution and upholding the rights that the Constitution provides, whether that's for states, federal rights, or individual rights. And the way that they do that is through judicial review, is by reviewing cases where they might see rights that are being violated and decide whether or not the Constitution upholds or does not uphold those rights.
And we can see the judicial branch being the interpreter of the Constitution, upholding the checks and balances, as the legislator is supposed to be the voice for the people, not the judiciary.
But we also see that the judiciary has adopted more purposes rather than just being the interpreter of the Constitution. They also provide checks on other branches of government through their ability in judicial review to strike down legislation and executive acts passed by the executive branch and the legislative branches.
Sometimes we see these checks and balances being abused by the judicial branch, and this can be seen by judicial activism, also known as legislating from the bench.
Give an example of that, of legislating from the bench?
Just one example of legislating from the bench was the case of the Brown v. Board of Education.
Another one would be Lochner v. New York, where they legislated from the bench and restricted 170 labor statutes that were put in place at the time.
But isn't there a difference between striking down laws and making them? Legislating from the bench doesn't it mean that they're actually making law? Do you have any example of that?
We can see in Roe v. Wade where it struck down a lot of, there was a lot of different laws and precedents that were in place in each state, and they standardized it to all be the same. And so this was creating, this created laws afterwards in relation to the decision.
And to add on to that, one way that the judicial branch sort of adds legislation to other to state constitutions is through incorporation, where after a major court case, they can decide to incorporate parts of an amendment into state constitutions.
Okay, let's talk about the division of power between the national government and the state governments, and the Supreme Court's role in dividing that power. Has the court gone too far in giving the national government powers vis-a-vis the states? Why or why not?
Well, the power of judicial review in itself was a major adoption of power by the Supreme Court, and it had major impact on federalism as well. By utilizing judicial review, as Justice Holmes said in that opening quote, their main purpose was to limit the reach of these state governments. Rather than limit the reach of Congress, it was more important to limit the reach of these state governments. And the use of judicial review allows the Supreme Court to not only sidestep state Supreme Courts, but also other bodies within state government.
So it's a good thing to the court using their power to give the national government more power.
I would say that it is a good thing because it's not that the Supreme Court giving the national government more power is not warranted. In the case of Hunter v. Martin, we saw a Virginia court try and contest the Supreme Court, saying that Virginia didn't have to follow what the Supreme Court ruled because at the time Virginia was a very heavily Democratic Republican state, which was much more for state rights versus federalism. And as the Supreme Court was giving more national power to the federal government, that contest between state and national governments was being held. And when it ruled in favor of federalists, we saw that, sorry, I sort of lost my train of thought, but basically it's not without warrant that power given to the federal branches giving power to the federal branches is not unwarranted. There you go, sorry about that.
Contrastingly, it could also be argued that it's a bad thing. Because not only did the Supreme Court adopt more of its own power onto itself, there's also not much limits on what the Supreme Court can adopt, and the limits, it basically puts limits on its own power, and in its own way, it acts as checks on its own power. So allowing the Supreme Court to expand federalism without any regulation could certainly pose some risks.
Would you all propose any
Could you talk
change?
about how theories?
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, Rita.
Would you all propose any change in the current way that justices are nominated or confirmed? Would you have a suggestion? There have been some talk about the process. Would you change it at all, or do you think it's good the way it is?
One way that state justices in Indiana are chosen is that they're elected. However, I think that to apply this to a federal level would be inadequate and would also provide an inherent bias towards interpretation of the Constitution one way or another based on political party. And because the Supreme Court is meant to be separate from political parties when interpreting the Constitution, I think that electing Supreme Court justices versus having someone in the executive branch select them and the legislative branch sort of filtering out and deciding eventually, I think that rather than elections is better.
But it can also be argued that there's already political bias in our current system of electing justices. One example that we can go back to was during President Obama's administration, where near the end of his administration, he tried to appoint our current Attorney General, Merrick Garland, to the Supreme Court, but he was not confirmed in the Senate because the Senate wanted to hold off until a Republican president was in court and could fill that vacant Supreme Court seat. So right there, we can see differing political views already playing a big role in what justices are being confirmed and what justices are not. So I do believe that it needs to be changed in order to promote more bipartisanship and a more streamlined process of appointing new judges.
And we can see that even with the late Justice Ginsburg retaining her spot in the court for as long as possible until a Democratic president could be appointed and her spot could be filled with another more liberal or Democratic justice.
You mentioned that you think the process should be streamlined to sort of remove some of the political partisanship. How would you do that? How would you streamline the process of appointment?
I believe that the rigorous hearings that take place over multiple days, and especially with Justice Brett Kavanaugh's hearings, there was a lot of controversy and witnesses were brought, and so it just wasn't a very efficient way to fill the seat. And I think that if it was maybe not as like highly publicized, or like it wasn't as big of a deal in the public eye, maybe they could take care of it behind closed doors and create a more efficient process.
Another way to streamline this process would be through ranked choice voting within Congress. So they could rank the number or which appointment they approved of in order to streamline the process.
Historians disagree about whether judicial review at the national level, checking a co-equal branch, was intended. What do you think? Was a national judicial review intended, and what evidence can you find to support that it was?
I think the supremacy clause. I think simply the intent of the framers within the Constitution spoke to the ability of the judicial branch. It wasn't only within the Constitution. Sorry, is it okay if I?
Go ahead, finish your thought.
Within the Constitution, it's not just the judicial branch that has a say in the interpretation of the Constitution. I think the framers also wanted Congress, through the exceptions clause, to have a say in that as well.
Great, thank you guys. That was very good. We threw a lot of very different questions at you, and you handled each of them very well. I thought your response to my question, where you mentioned that it's the Supreme Court is meant to uphold and maintain rights, and then another one of you mentioned that it's meant to check the other branches of government. I thought that was a very good answer. I also thought that using Roe v. Wade as an example of judicial activism was a good answer. And you brought in local judicial processes as well. You mentioned that judges are elected in Indiana. I think that's very sophisticated that you are aware of not just the national level, but the state level too. So good job. This is excellent.
I was interested that you mentioned the election of judges, and you mentioned the money that's involved in those campaigns of those judges. That is true in my state as well, and it presents a fairly serious problem in my mind for high court decisions in Alabama because of those political contributions that enabled those people to be elected to the high court. And you hit the nail on the head when you said that won't do in Washington. I'm not sure the way we have it now, though, is a very, and by the way, efficiency is not the only answer. When you stop and sort out the profession and the import of which we rely on these justices for, it's not the time and it's not the exposure really that you need to be concerned about. It's, do we have the right people? So, but I really thought y'all sorted a lot of that out for us, and I appreciated the approach that you took on in every single case, in every single answer you had. You argued both sides, and I thought that was really, really good on your part.
I concur with all of that, Indiana. You make me, again, proud to be a Hoosier. And I really appreciated your performance. One thing I would suggest moving forward throughout the day, obviously you had this immense amount of knowledge about Unit 3. I mean, that was clear from everybody. But try to take it, and in the other hearings as well, try to take your specific examples, and if you can, make a generalization or two that kind of capture your idea about those specific examples. So as a We the People student, you have to be equally as comfortable giving specific details of a case that shows something, but you also have to be able to put those ideas into some larger framework or context. So just as you're going through, like the question about the division of power between the national government and the states, you might have said, well, when things are really important, we need to nationalize them, like the Bill of Rights, for example, or the rights of discrete and insular minorities, as they said in Caroline Products footnote 4. So those kinds of things. But overall, I thought you did a fantastic job. good work, my friends.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. And with